Welcome to the Center Square Radio Hour for the second weekend of September 2025. I'm your host, Chris Krug. Established in 2019 by the Franklin News Foundation, the Center Square publishes original taxpayer-centric straight news, focusing on the size, scope, and effectiveness of local, state, and federal government. On the Radio Hour, our journalists explore their top stories, adding insight to the headlines. We'll also present thoughts on the economy from Dr. Orphe Divounguy, PhD economist. In today's show, we'll discuss the legal battle over tariff powers. We'll hear about the beginning of a trial of Ryan Routh, and we'll look at President Trump and Illinois Governor Pritzker's sparring over sending National Guard troops to Chicago. We'll be right back with all that and more in the Center Square Radio Hour.
What does freedom look like tomorrow? On the Future of Freedom podcast, we explore the principles behind our nation's founding freedoms and the policies required to sustain those freedoms. Featuring thought leaders and policy experts, each episode dives deep into debates around how to protect these principles now and into the future. Subscribe to the Future of Freedom wherever you get your podcasts and be part of the conversation.
Teacher Lauren Johnson returned all the graded essays but one. He believed that one student was capable of more.
I don't believe taking the middle of the road is your philosophy. This time, write something you really believe.
The student wrote a new one about excellence. Instead of just grading an essay, Mr. Johnson changed a life. I am that student. I became a writer, and I wrote this to thank him.
Thank a teacher and pass it on from passiton.com.
Tired of news that tells you what to think rather than what to think about? At the Center Square, we bring you the reliable, credible news you need focused on what actually matters: government accountability, taxes, and the decisions affecting your community. Our award-winning newsroom cuts through the noise to deliver fact-driven journalism you can trust. Stay informed. Visit thecentersquare.com today and subscribe. Once again, that is thecentersquare.com.
Some people would call him a loser. He ran for state office. He was beaten. He started a business. He failed. He ran for Congress. He lost. He was nominated for vice president. He lost again. But he knew only those who never tried are the real losers. And Abraham Lincoln was no loser. Persistence. Pass it on. From the Foundation for a Better Life at values.com.
Welcome back to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm Chris Krug. With more on the tariff case, let's go to Dan McCaleb.
After an appeals court upheld a lower court's ruling that President Donald Trump does not have the constitutional authority to issue sweeping tariffs on foreign countries, the president appealed the latest decision to the U.S. Supreme Court. Joining me to discuss this is the Center Square tariff guru, Brett Rowan. Brett, tell our listeners more about this ongoing legal fight.
So this is set up to be a pretty big fight. We've got a group of small businesses and Democrat-led states on one side, and we've got the Trump administration on the other side. And Trump here is fighting for basically his entire economic agenda. He's used that tariff authority that he says he has under the IEEPA, which is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977. So he's used that to underpin almost all of his tariff powers. So everything from the tariffs on the European Union to all the other countries. And basically his argument to the Supreme Court is saying, hey, the stakes couldn't be higher. These tariffs are actually working. He's saying, I've used these tariffs to make peace deals around the globe. I've used these tariffs to essentially reorder global trade in favor of America. We're reducing our trade deficits. We're making trade deals. Things are working. Don't take this authority away now. Now, there's a lot more to it. There is they filed more than 200 pages last night. But a big part of what he's saying here is that things are going great. Don't take this away from me now. Now, the small businesses, of course, don't like this. And the Democrat-led states say that it's going to mean higher costs for them as well. But we'll have to see where the Supreme Court goes here. It's going to be Trump is asking for a really quick ruling here. He wants an expedited schedule. They're talking about having stuff ready to go in the next couple of weeks. So this would be a very, and the states and the small businesses aren't opposed to moving quickly. They want to move quickly because, some of the businesses that are represented here are already struggling to continue, have essentially stopped ordering new product because, they're worried about pricing and how this is going to play out.
Brett, while many of these legal battles regarding the Trump administration are highly partisan, this one is a little bit less so, because one of the legal groups that brought the lawsuit it's a free market, some would say call them conservative group. It seems to me that President Trump is putting a lot of eggs in this basket because, as you mentioned, it's not just about fair trade. He's negotiating other deals. One other thing he wants to do is bring manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. with these tariffs in place. Many companies have already said, hey, we're going to start producing our goods or whatever in the United States. So this really is, assuming the Supreme Court takes the case, which I'm sure it will, this could be a very big ruling for the entirety of the Trump administration.
Yeah, so this could really set the tone going forward. If the Supreme Court doesn't rule in his favor, he has a few other options, but in terms of his own presidential tariff authority, but none of them are as broad or as none of them give them quite the freedom that he thinks he has under the IEEPA, which is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. So he's saying we've got an emergency. This is working. But the other side is saying, hey, listen, 2 federal courts have already said no. Our businesses are in trouble already. So, they're saying the stakes are high on their end too. So, they're all for a quick resolution here. But I guess we'll see. This could be a real good, time to measure exactly how long it takes the Supreme Court to move. But in addition to that, yeah, Trump definitely has a lot of eggs in this basket. He has used tariffs to great effect. He has essentially told the world to turn around and pay attention and do what he wants. And he's got this tremendous power that the courts are threatening to yank out from under him. So, yeah, I mean, I think that the stakes couldn't be higher.
And the tariffs already have brought in significant amounts of revenue over several years, assuming the Supreme Court allows the tariffs to stay in place. It could pay for almost all of the deficit that was created by extending the 2017 era Trump tax cuts. Is that right?
Yes. So, the CBO came out, or the Congressional Budget Office came out, not that long ago and said, hey, this could bring in $4 trillion over the next decade, which is about what, extending those tax cuts as part of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, would do. So, although S&P and some of the credit rating agencies say it's not, that the One Big Beautiful Bill isn't entirely, going to be canceled out by tariffs. The CBO estimate says it's going to come really close. So there really is a lot riding on this. And I think that if Trump loses here, he's going to have to turn around. But what that turnaround looks like, I have no idea at this point.
Brett, to close, I'm going to put you on the spot. Care to make a prediction on how the Supreme Court rules?
This is a tough one. I can see it going either way, really. So the Supreme Court has sided with Trump. He's got a 6-3 conservative majority, so that stands in his favor. But you've got 2 lower courts, and some really powerful groups, including the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and law professors. Some members of Congress have said, hey, he just doesn't have the authority, and that Congress has the authority to impose taxes. So, it's too hard to guess for me at this point.
All right. Thank you, though, Brett, for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.
Thanks to Dan and Brett. You're listening to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm your host, Chris Krug. With more on Ryan Routh's upcoming trial, let's now go to Kristen Smith.
Joining me today is the Center Square's East Coast Managing Editor, Alan Wooten. This week, Alan followed Ryan Routh's upcoming trial on Monday. And for those who don't remember, he is the man who tried to assassinate Donald Trump on his golf course in September. So tell us more, Alan, about what's coming up on Monday with this trial.
Well, it should be an interesting play out. The jury selection begins Monday. They expect the trial to begin on Thursday of next week. The judge has booked out about 4 weeks for it. So it should go, I don't know. I think that would be relatively quickly in court terms or so. He is representing himself. And that in itself has already lent to a bit of a different situation. The judge Johnson has made some rules and things that he can and cannot do in the courtroom, such as using the podium, stand up and question witnesses or talk to the jury, that kind of thing. She's also cautioned, though, that if he makes any sudden movements, there will be U.S. Marshals in the courtroom and they are to act decisively. You can take that for what it sort of implies. But he also this week, we've learned, and we'll have a story on the centersquare.com later today, following up on the fact that, he filed some court documents and he has challenged President Trump to a round of golf and said if he loses, that the president can execute him. He's also challenged him to something of a smackdown, said that he can be in shackles and if the president can give it his worst. So it's got a tinge of bizarreness that's already leading off. Ryan is an interesting guy. We at the Center Square last year, we contacted the election officials in Hawaii and we looked at the records in North Carolina. We saw that he voted both places last year. So he's a construction worker by trade out of North Carolina is where his residence is. He did live in Hawaii a little bit, but this trial should be I guess a bit fascinating just to watch it play out. The judge has her hands full.
Just to clarify, you said he voted in both places. Do you mean was one primary and one general, or do we know was that how it works? Because otherwise that would be quite alarming.
Yes, he did vote in the primary in North Carolina on Super Tuesday last March. In North Carolina, the State Board of Elections does have records, and they are public records that anyone can search today or whatever, and you can go in and see which ballot an unaffiliated voter chooses to use at the primary. In North Carolina, if you're unaffiliated, you can choose to vote for the Democratic ticket or the Republican ticket. And then we talked to an election official in Hawaii. They're not set up this exact same way, but the fellow I talked to there, he did confirm, and we did report that within the next day after the incident at the golf course.
Back up to how you mentioned the bizarreness of this case in general. We'd be remiss not to mention that 2 months earlier, we had the attempted assassination of Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania. And in that case, the suspect was killed, and it was a very serious, very different conversation than what we're having now. So will you talk a little bit about how this Secret Service responded in this case versus how we all know they responded in Butler?
Yeah, both of them are interesting in their own tales, but the one in Florida was even interesting. Even after what happened in Butler, Ryan was able to get around the perimeter of the golf course on a Sunday afternoon with weapons. And it would, I can remember as a lot of our reporters were talking in our meetings and stuff, it just seemed incredulous that a sweep, as they say in the Secret Service business, a sweep would not have made sure there was nobody even remotely close to where he was. But he was along the fence line. Granted, on a golf course, that can be a good ways away from the playing area. But he was there. He did have weapons. The agents who were out on the golf course, sort of ahead of the group as they played, did spotted somebody suspicious. And when they raised their rifle, then that's when he dropped his weapon. He never fired a shot. I think an agent did fire a shot in his direction, but they were able to capture him quickly on the highway as he tried to escape.
All right. Well, I'm sure you're going to keep us updated as this trial continues starting next week. To follow that along with us, join us at thecentersquare.com.
Thank you, Kristen and Alan. You're listening to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm your host, Chris Krug. With more on the possibility of National Guard troops in Chicago, let's turn now to Greg Bishop.
Dominating national news this week is public safety in Chicago, with President Donald Trump saying they're going in, but didn't disclose when. Democratic leaders like Governor J.B. Pritzker are opposing the expected expansion of federal immigration enforcement and are vowing to go to court to stop it as speculation continues how the National Guard may play a role. Joining me to discuss this and more is the Center Square Chicago reporter, Jim Talamonte. Jim, Trump said that they're going into Chicago, but what that means, it's not quite clear at this point.
That's right. One of the reporters who was talking to him during an interview session this week first asked about the National Guard, and Trump talked about some things. Then when he followed up with another question, the reporter didn't specifically say National Guard, but Trump then said, well, we're going in. So does we're going in mean more ATF, more ICE, more FBI presence, or does it mean actual deployment of National Guard soldiers? We're not really sure. Maybe it's going to be something that happens one step at a time. We do know, of course, that with the big, beautiful bill passed, that there's a lot more funding for ICE. They've been hiring left and right. And Chicago has been, I don't know if I'd say ground zero, but certainly one of the ground zeros around the country. And in terms of immigration enforcement, in part, quite probably because of the opposition expressed by Mayor Brandon Johnson, Governor J.B. Pritzker, and they have dug in against the president, and they've both, since January, delivered a steady stream, continual stream of just anti-Trump verbal attacks. And so the president obviously has them in his sights, and so he's going to take it to him, it appears. Again, what that's going to look like, we don't know. There have been reports that there's going to be some kind of deployment at Naval Station Great Lakes, which is north of Chicago, where, federal agents, whoever they might be, or federal government representatives might go from there is anyone's guess. But there's a lot still to be determined. But it's pretty clear that given the amount that the president and the vice president were asked about Illinois and Chicago in particular this week, Chicago's got more national attention, for better or for worse, and then the state of Illinois by extension with Governor Pritzker.
We've got the governor having practically daily news conferences addressing this issue. Just before you and I hopped on here Thursday afternoon, the governor was in front of a microphone, and he talked about what his understanding is and sources that he's hearing from about the possibility that they'll be fully staged Friday. And then you've got the potential of parades on Saturday celebrating, Mexican heritage, and the questions of whether or not people need to get out there because they're possibly going to see increased ICE enforcement on the streets. And again, this is all according to Governor J.B. Pritzker, who just moments ago before we started recording this laid out that schedule. Jim, it could be an interesting weekend, but with all the pushback there's been from Mayor Brandon Johnson, from Governor J.B. Pritzker, and even Democrats in Congress against the idea of putting federal troops on Chicago streets, you've had residents all up and down for months, if not a couple of years now, saying that the federal government needs to intervene in Chicago, not just for crime, but also for immigration.
That's right. We've heard this from a number of residents. And again, not just this week, but over the past months and even years, people getting up before public comment, before city council meetings or even committee hearings, people talking to reporters. And to be fair, on the other side of it, there have been not only Democrats, but some conservatives have concerns about federal deployments in Chicago for this purpose. And that there's been some couching of that to say, well, this would be for support and for presence, not for actual policing and that kind of thing. But of course, the opponents are saying this is militarization. This is and that kind of thing. But yes, a lot of residents have said we need this. And in particular, there was some polling out this week that showed the only ethnic demographic or the racial demographic, I guess, in favor, or I should say, opposed to the federal deployments would be white people. That Black and Latino residents of Chicago absolutely want the National Guard here because their populations, their communities tend to be more affected by crime and tend to have more crime victims than other communities. So these are the people who are asking for federal help and for the National Guard, in large part because local efforts, despite the numbers we hear from the Chicago mayor and the Illinois governor, to the people of communities, that's just not good enough. And one of our Republican lawmakers this week is Martin McLaughlin of Barrington Hills, said, saying that the crime numbers are better right now. It's like taking if you had a temperature of 106, a fever, and it went down to 105. Well, that's it's a little better, but it's still fatal. And so that's where a lot of people on the ground are. But again, the politicians in power, at least in the city of Chicago, almost all are opposed to the president's potential moves.
And one of the stories you can find at thecentersquare.com for Illinois is Chicago residents, we need help from feds to fight crime. Jim, you talked to somebody who is a crime survivor, having lost a couple of people over the past 5 years or so to violent crime.
Yeah, really sad. Shantae Baker, a young lady on the south side of Chicago, talked to me about losing a good friend in June who was shot in the middle of the day on 94th Street in Chicago. As far as she knows, there's been no arrest in the case. Someone just came up to her friend, shot him, and it was a fatal wound. And she had also lost her brother a few years ago. And she didn't really dive into the politics of it too much, but I asked, well, do you think having federal, National Guard troops, is that a good idea? She said, well, I just honestly think we need it. We need help because I hear shooting, we're having shootings all the time here. It's not, if not every day, it's every week. And you hear gunshots and you have incidents, and that's aside from the less violent crime that's still going on that has driven businesses out of the community. And then we still see in downtown Chicago along the Magnificent Mile, businesses are down something like 50%. And so it's a major economic issue in addition to being the even more significant public safety issue. And of course they go together, but yeah, Shantae Baker said, we need it. You can tell there was some pain there. And this is someone who's had to deal with it personally, unlike the people in political office who generally, in major political offices around here have their security details.
Another story you'll be able to read in the space of public safety, especially with the expectation of increased immigration enforcement in Chicago and elsewhere across the country, is the headline, Arrest of Mexican National for 2023 Murder, called Long Overdue Justice. You can read that story again at thecentersquare.com.
Thanks to Greg and Jim. After the break, we'll look at more top stories from across the nation. What is on the docket for Congress as it returns from summer recess? Will California's Family Preparedness Plan Act become law despite opponents' concerns? And what are the economic impacts of tariffs? All that and more when we return on the Center Square Radio Hour. Welcome back to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm Chris Krug. Here are this week's quick hits, some of the original reporting you may have missed at thecentersquare.com. President Donald Trump said he'll be signing an executive order ending mail-in voting and requiring voter ID. Currently, every state in the U.S. allows for some form of mail-in voting. In a few states, voting is conducted primarily by mail, and registered voters are automatically sent ballots. Those states include California, Colorado, Washington, and 5 others. Trump has long pushed for strengthening of the American election system, especially after widespread allegations of voter fraud after the 2020 election. As part of that effort, Trump signed an executive order in March to bolster the enforcement of election law by establishing new voter identification requirements for federal elections. U.S. Space Command headquarters will move to Alabama from Colorado. Calling Huntsville by its beloved Rocket City nickname, President Trump reversed yet another Biden-era action and credited the city for fighting harder than anybody else. Huntsville is home to the Redstone Army Airfield and NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. The Space and Missile Defense Command of the Army is also in Huntsville and is the source of the community moniker. Taxpayers are covering rents up to $6,020 per month in Arizona, leading taxpayer advocates to question the growing duration of federal Section 8 housing choice voucher usage. Housing choice voucher recipients remain in the program for an average of 15.1 years. That's up from an average of 12.4 years in 2000, according to a 2024 federal report. When asked about a 2026 budget proposal from the Trump administration that would limit Section 8 assistance to 2 years, U.S. Housing and Urban Development Secretary Scott Turner recounted his meeting with a recipient whose family had been housed by the program for multiple generations. Students in Wisconsin are heading back to school with a new snapshot of the state's school spending picture. The Badger Institute released a report that shows raw per-pupil spending in Wisconsin has doubled since 2020. In 2020, Wisconsin spent a little less than $8,000 per student. In 2024, the Badger Institute put that number at a little more than $18,000 per year. When you factor in inflation, the report says the increases are not as steep, but schools are spending more per student today than they were 25 years ago. Georgia Representatives Tim Fleming and Victor Anderson are asking for a test of hand-marked ballots ahead of the 2026 midterms. The Georgia General Assembly passed a law in 2024 that would eliminate the use of QR codes in 2026 for counting ballots, which could force election officials to use only hand-marked ones. You can find more on these stories and others like them from across the country at thecentersquare.com. We'll be right back with more on the Center Square Radio Hour.
He ran for state office and was beaten. Started a business and failed. Ran for Congress and lost. But thankfully, Abraham Lincoln didn't give up. Persistence. Pass it on. From the Foundation for a Better Life at values.com.
Welcome back to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm Chris Krug. With more on Congress, let's now go back to Dan McCaleb.
The clock is ticking to get plans in place to continue funding the federal government by the end of the current fiscal year, September 30th. Joining me to discuss this is the Center Square congressional reporter, Therese Boudreau. Therese, that's not a lot of time to pass a number of spending bills. Where are we at in the process?
Yeah, so it's not a lot of time. In fact, it is probably not enough time. Right now, the Senate has passed 3 bills in one package called a minibus. And then the House, as of yesterday, has also passed 3 bills, but separately. And there are 12 total bills that need to pass. And each bill has to pass both the House and the Senate. And currently, none of those bills have passed both chambers. And so we have that deadline coming up on September 30th. And it took weeks for these other bills that have passed one of the chambers for that to happen. So especially given the lack of bipartisanship in the House, nobody is believing they're going to be able to pass all 12 in time, including leaders. The appropriations heads are looking at other options besides the normal government funding process at this point.
And what is that process, Therese? It's been a while since Congress has passed full year budgets. They've been passing what they call continuing resolutions, which essentially set spending levels at what was passed previously.
Yes. So actually, Congress never even passed the full 12 appropriations bills, like a full proper budget last year, fiscal year 2025. So the government has been running on continuing resolutions since before Biden left office, which means that a 4th continuing resolution, because they passed 3 last year just to keep the government funding on cruise control, a 4th one would yet again reauthorize funding from fiscal year 2024, which again was when Biden was in office. And so that includes a lot of programs like with climate or DEI or whatever, a lot of initiatives or things that Republicans do not like. They would be extending funding for those things. This besides the fact that, again, it would have been more than 12 months since the government has been properly funded. But at this point, a continuing resolution may be the only option, because otherwise you get at least a partial government shutdown. So apparently appropriators, so the appropriations chairs are the ones who kind of oversee the appropriations process, getting those bills through subcommittees. both Republicans and the Democratic vice chairs are thinking that, okay, the Senate's 3-bill minibus was bipartisan. The Senate's been going at it kind of from a more bipartisan route than the House, mostly because, even though Republicans have majorities in both chambers, they still need 7 Democratic votes in the Senate, whereas the House can just do stuff, Republicans in the House can do stuff however they want. So they're saying, okay, what if we take these 3 bipartisan bills, and if we can get them through the House, then those 3 can go into effect. So the agencies that those cover, which includes Veterans Affairs, military construction, the legislative branch, those agencies and those programs will have new funding. And then the rest of them, so that would cover the remaining 9 bills and the agencies and programs that are covered under those bills, the rest of them would be covered by a continuing resolution. So the rest of them would run on fiscal year 2024 funding. So that might be a little bit more palatable, I think they're hoping, to Republicans who were promised last year that, or in March rather, that they would agree to this third continuing resolution because they were told, hey, for fiscal year 2026, we'll do it the right way. Just agree to this now so we can get all this other legislative stuff done, and then we'll do it the right way. Well, that's not happening. So again, a slightly smaller in scale continuing resolution and then passing the 3 of the 12 appropriations bills, that looks like the most likely route at this point. That's at least what congressional leaders are saying.
Of course, Congress has been passing these continuing resolutions, the federal budget. They have been deficit budgets, well over $1 trillion, near $2 trillion a year. The U.S. debt is now at more than $37.3 trillion. President Trump has said in the past that he wants Congress to pass balanced budgets. These continuing resolutions would keep spending levels at what they have been. That's not going to eliminate the deficit spending that we've seen over the last several years. With the lack of partisanship in Washington, D.C., it doesn't seem like they're going to be able to eliminate those deficits and start to reduce the national debt.
Yeah, that's at this point. I mean, again, there are some fiscal hawks like, Chip Roy and Thomas Massey in the House, and I think maybe a couple in the Senate who, they try to hold the line with that. But it's kind of like, I think Trump's agenda is overpowering all of it, right? So it's a lot of the messaging is just, from Republican leaders to their constituents is, look, like we care about the deficit as well, but, right now we need to, pass this part of Trump's agenda. So whether that's tax cuts or whether that's making sure that funding for the next year cuts a bunch of, so-called green energy subsidies or diversity initiatives or stuff like that. They're kind of trying to send the message that, okay, for the greater good, we, meaning what Trump wants to get done, we need to pass this one big beautiful bill, or in this case, these, appropriations bills. So it's a very complicated dynamic because there are quite a few Republicans who really don't like the fiscal trajectory that we're on. And they agree that we should be cutting spending. And to be fair, a few of the, or at least many of the appropriations bills that are coming out of the House, which again, like I said, if we take the CR route, probably won't see the light of day for quite a while. They do cut spending in different areas like that. It's like, the 2% decrease overall, and then there's maybe a 15% decrease here. So there are like hundreds of millions of cuts. But, in the long run, it's not like it's really it doesn't make a big impact on the deficit. So again, I think right now there are some Republicans who really want to reduce spending, but they're kind of caught because they don't want to be opposing Trump's agenda. But sometimes Trump's agenda is just very costly and needs to get done right now. And so it doesn't leave a lot of time to do things carefully. So, we'll see with the CR and the passing a CR with the 3-bill minibus. It's most likely thing that's going to happen.
Well, Therese, it sounds like you and our colleagues at the Center Square who cover Congress in Washington, D.C. are going to have a busy a few weeks ahead of you. Thank you for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with the budgeting process and much more at thecentersquare.com.
Big thanks to Dan and Therese. You're listening to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm your host, Chris Krug. With more on California Assembly Bill 495, let's now go to Eliana Kernodle.
The California Senate Appropriations Committee sent Assembly Bill 495 on its way to the Senate floor, despite strong opposition from Republicans. Joining me to tell us more is the Center Square's education reporter, Esther Wickham. Esther, we covered AB 495 before, but could you recap for us what the bill is about and what it would do?
Yeah, thanks, Eliana. So AB 495, also known as the Family Preparedness Plan Act of 2025, is authored by Assembly member Celeste Rodriguez. She is a Democrat from the San Fernando Valley. And this bill essentially comes in the face of the rise in deportation that we have seen the Trump administration cracking down on. Immigrant families have been detained and deported. And this bill, essentially from the Democrats, has the goal to unite families and to make sure that these immigrant families and these immigrant parents that are being detained and deported have a plan and are prepared for their children to be taken care of, for someone to, protect these vulnerable children. And that's essentially the goal of the bill. The bill also instates a one-page affidavit form that these people that are planning to, take these children fill out. And according to the bill, it can be a non-relative extended family member. So my best friend's sister's cousin's husband could, potentially fill out this form. But also for these parents, it could be, a close family member as well. This one-page affidavit form could authorize, anything that has to do with school-related medical care, enrollment into a school, unenrollment of a school. And this form only requires you to fill out your name, your address, and then the minor that you're picking up, the child's name. And there's been a lot of, controversy and pushback from this. One aspect of it is that there is no requirement for a government ID or any consent or signature from the parents. And logically, this makes sense, for the Democrats, because if a family member or if a parent is detained or deported, they won't have access to filling out that form or to give that kind of consent. And so this is kind of a way for these parents to know that their child is still being taken care of and that they will have, a safety net to make sure that even though they're gone, someone will be taking care of their child.
So then can you get into a little bit more of what's been said on each side as this debate has gone on?
Going back a couple of months ago, this started to become a huge issue for a lot of conservative family groups, family advocacy groups, because their biggest argument, specifically the California Family Council up here in Sacramento, California, say that this bill is a child trafficker's dream bill. Looking at the bill, they state that it doesn't specify this is only for immigrant families. This just says for California families. It doesn't specify that, in the event that your parents are detained, or deported, this is what's going to happen. It just says, anyone in California. So these conservative groups are saying that this one-page affidavit form, as they state, doesn't require any kind of government ID, doesn't require any kind of consent or form for the parents to sign, could be an opportunity for someone to essentially just walk into the school and take your child, because you can enroll or unenroll them in the school. Jonathan Keller, he's the president of the California Family Council. He said in a press release that essentially this bill undermines the parental authority by empowering, distant relatives, people that are even unrelated to them, and at the end of the day, dangerous strangers with the unchecked access to children. Attorneys are also speaking out against this, specifically one attorney, Nicole Pearson, who is the founder of Facts, Law, Truth, and Justice. She actually testified before the state Senate, and, this is what she had to say on the Senate floor.
With just one sheet of paper from the internet, California wants to let someone that is not related to your child remove her from school, enroll her in any other school in the state, authorize any medical treatment of her, including mental health services and drugs, without the parent's notice and knowledge or consent. This is not fear-mongering. I'm not being hyperbolic. It's stated right here in the caretaker's affidavit that I printed for you, which I pulled directly from the bill. Line 6 allows this transfer of parental rights without even having to speak to the parent. The author claims AB 495 is about giving immigrant families the agency to choose the safety plan that works, that preserves family unity. Where is the parental designation? Their signature at the bottom here is not required. She's co-opting a term, non-relative family member, from the foster care and dependency probate systems, but without any of the procedural guardrails. No background checks, no interviews, no home visits, no fingerprinting, parental involvement, or civil, criminal, or professional liability if the child is harmed.
So yeah, as you can see, this is a common argument that the conservatives are making. This is giving strangers or, non-relatives or even relatives of these children kind of unchecked authority to fill out this page. And the thing is, to add, this one-page affidavit is available to anyone. And so that's kind of the main arguments that we've seen on the right. And we will continue to see those arguments be made until we see, what exactly happens. A lot of people think that this bill is now law, but the reality is it's, as you said, it's being sent to the Senate floor. So it was the committee voted in a 5-2 decision for it. And now it's being sent to the full Senate for it to be voted on. And then the next process will be, for Governor Gavin Newsom to sign it, and then it will be, instated as law. But with this pushback, obviously, Rodriguez has responded. She and other groups are in support of this bill. And they have responded to what they call, misinformation from Californians' Christian right. And, something that she said in a press release is, at the end of the day, her goal with making this bill is keeping families together. As we said, that's their goal. They want unity, because again, this in their minds is families being prepared in the case that they are detained or deported. And they want their families to be ensured that these kids are cared for and by people that they know and love. As she says, quote, "The claims from opponents are simply false and dangerous. No family should ever be torn apart because of immigration enforcement or misinformation." So, of course, Rodriguez, her main response is, this is all hyperbolic. This is fear-mongering.
Well, Esther, thank you for your insights on this story. You can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.
Thank you, Eliana and Esther. You're listening to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm your host, Chris Krug. Join me to dig into the impacts of tariffs. It's Orphe Divondi.
Dr. O, it's time to check in on tariffs. What's your take on tariffs right now? It seems like deals are still being negotiated.
I mean, yeah, geopolitics play a big role into this, right? So like the Russia, Ukraine, India oil saga, it's going to play a lot of stuff. But look, at the end of the day, the tariff rates are going to keep changing. And that's just the nature of the administration, the policy climate that we're in, right? Where the administration, changes things all the time. And we know unfortunately, that's stuff that's going to happen. What's the one constant, right? The fact that the tariff rates are going to be higher than they were in the past. And that's the one thing we should be focusing on. I think there's going to be a lot of uncertainty about, what the next tariff rate is going to be. And that's specifically the problem. The uncertainty is the problem for businesses. How do I comply with this stuff? What is it going to cost me? I have no idea. And until I figure out what it's going to cost me, I can't go and make new investments. I can't go and hire new workers. I can't do anything, right? I'm kind of on pause trying to figure out what it means. And I think that's specifically the problem. When you look at the research that was done, and by the way, research from the tariffs, the back in 2017, 2018, first President Trump go at it. By the end of 2018, the tariffs that were imposed, right? The trade policies that were imposed cost the U.S. economy in aggregate in terms of real income adjusted for inflation, roughly $1.4 billion per month. $1.4 billion per month, right? And so ultimately, that's what happens. When you throw in a bunch of uncertainty into the economy, people pause. They don't know what to do. They're not hiring. They're not giving workers raises. Nothing's happening. It's costly. The cost is not a big reduction necessarily. Yes, you could get some of that. If prices increase a little bit, your income adjusted for inflation actually goes down, right? That's like simple stuff, right? But on top of that, the uncertainty, it's also the stuff that you don't see, the stuff that could have been done had we had not injected all this uncertainty into the economy, right? The economy, right, before the start of this year, PCE inflation was moving closer to the 2% target, right? What if we had actually reached the 2% target? Maybe we'd have had a cut or two already. Maybe interest rates would have gone down a little bit. Or what if we didn't have another big increase in fiscal deficits, and deficit spending going forward, right? Maybe the markets would have been like, well, you know what? Maybe we don't have that inflation problem to worry about, going into the future. And the 10-year yield would have gone down a little bit and borrowing costs would have gone down a little bit. It's the stuff that we don't see, right? That people completely ignore. And when you add it all up, if you look at the 2018 story, right, it's worse today. It's going to be a lot worse today because, well, for one, the tariff rate is higher. And again, I'm not worried necessarily that tariffs are going to cause inflation. I don't think so. I think it's just a big one-time price increase. It's a tax on the consumer. A tax does what? It reduces your income, your spending, your income. It shrinks the size of the economy. That's what taxes do, right? And so it's a tax, right? And so that's the problem. But then there's the uncertainty. And the uncertainty is another tax on top of the actual tax, right? And so that, unfortunately, that's where we are today. So when we think about the tariff situation, there are debates about, well, maybe it's going to help domestic producers. Maybe it's going to do this. You don't have to debate any of that. You can debate all of that, but you could think about the stuff that you're seeing today, which is the uncertainty in terms of compliance, right? That's a tax on the economy. You could ignore all the other stuff. You could debate all the other stuff, but you could look at the fact that uncertainty alone is a tax, and that tax hurts incomes for all Americans, unfortunately.
Appreciate your insight as always, Dr. O. That'll do it for another week of the Center Square Radio Hour. If you missed today's show, you can find it wherever you find podcasts. I'm Chris Krug, and on behalf of everyone at the Franklin News Foundation, thank you for listening to the Center Square Radio Hour.